we're just going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. What we're going to do today is we're going to review all the TXR forms that we most often use that were posted this morning at 8 o'clock for use. We're still waiting for Mitch. Do you know when DocuSign will have him in? They said after, it could take a couple of days.
That's the last I've heard, last update I got also.
Yeah. So are we required to use them? Yes, we are. But if they're not posted for you in DocuSign, I think when they are available in DocuSign, that would become our mandatory date, basically. But what we're going to talk about today are really the changes that are being done because of the NAR settlement, right? And how they affect you as the agent. So we're going to go through all of that so that you are ready. August 17th is the deadline. What do I mean by that? Well, HAR is going to have the compensation removed by August 17th. Probably late on the 16th, they will remove those fields.
Marilyn, they're in .loop, so I don't know about DocuSign yet. Probably.
Okay, but they are in .loop.
They are in .loop. Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten some calls where there's agents who don't use .loop, so.
Okay.
But it is in
see if
.loop, so that's good, yeah. But DocuSign says something about mapping was going to take some time or something like that. But what we have is, I'm going to go through the draft forms, even though the final versions are ready. And the reason for that, it shows you what they added and what they removed. If you go out and look at the final version, you're going to be doing what? Well, what's changed, right? That kind of thing. So today I'm going to use the draft form so that you can see what has been removed and what's been added. But again, they are available for use. They always are in the Texas Realtors thing through .loop, and you'll be notified. There's some echo. Okay, somebody's not muted. Okay. So what we're going to look at today are the draft versions, but it's our listing agreements, a buyer tenant agreement, some new forms, the new short form for the buyer tenant agreement, and then an addendum. So we're going to be looking at all that, and all the registrations agreements change too. So we'll kind of go through that. So right now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the forms that affect the listing agent and review those. And so we're going to. Okay, so this is the draft form of our residential listing for sale, right? But they changed the one for lease to reflect the same changes, the one for the farm and ranch. Commercial, this does not affect commercial in any way, shape, or form, okay? What did they do in the listing agreement? Well, they took my advice. When I created the addendum, I said it was crazy how all this compensation for the sellers to negotiate with the listing broker and agent was in another paragraph too, in paragraph 8. So they placed all broker compensation where it belongs under one paragraph, and that's paragraph 5. Now, the first paragraph that you'll see is what you will find everywhere in almost all of our forms from Texas Realtors, and it's the requirement for the NAR settlement to always put a compensation disclosure, right? That it's not fixed or controlled, that it's totally negotiable, right? That we haven't done that. So you'll see that paragraph a lot in some of the form changes. So here's what basically they did. In paragraph 5A, they said to the sellers, what is the compensation that you're willing to negotiate with us for the listing broker and the other broker? Okay, so in this 5A1, it has when earned and payable, seller will pay broker, and it says insert total amount for broker and other broker. Thank goodness they finally put that notation in there. For years, we had agents not correctly completing it. So it says, again, this is the seller that says, I instruct the listing broker to compensate the other broker. All right. And it says percentage of the sales price, or it could be a flat fee. Now, they have B. Well, Marilyn, why did they have B there? Well, there are some agents that do a variable rate, right? And so that would be the notation of most likely where the variable rate would go. Now, further defining it in the transparency and for the sellers is 5A2. What is that? Well, 5A1 said what? Listing brokers total compensation, including other broker, right? So this 5A2 says from amount stated above, broker will pay the other broker the following fees if the other broker procures a buyer that purchases the property. A is if the other broker represents the buyer percentage of the sales price or dollar amount. Notice it says nothing about MLS participants, folks. Nothing. It just says other broker, right? We used to have that differentiation. Now in 5A2B, we'll never complete this. Your broker is never going to be responsible for another broker's agent's action. So no sub-agency exists for us, mainly because it's not covered under E&O, right? So in this, you'll either put in A or, you know, whatever the value will be, but it is not applicable at all for our brokerage. Any
Marilyn,
questions?
yes, I'm just looking at under A, it's Marcia. And when earned and payable, I'll check A, I'll put my 6%, and then I'll put down on the B.
Yeah,
what?
no, don't mention any numbers in any of our sessions, okay?
Okay,
You'll put whatever percentage of the sales price, or if you want to receive a flat fee.
Okay.
And then 5A2 says sellers, from the amount above, this is what I'm going to offer to the other broker, either a flat fee or a dollar amount. Now, I've done this to almost over 1,000 agents already in brokerages. So here's what I'm going to tell you is one of the brokers contacted me and said, how can we tell if the listing agent is telling the truth? I said, what? From now on, if it's stripped out of MLS, you're going to negotiate with them and it's going to be in writing. You're not privileged to their listing agreement terms. That's between the listing broker and the seller only. So again, you will be negotiating with the compensation agreement after August 17th. There will be no compensation offered to you at all because MLS will totally strip any form of compensation, okay? Now 5B says sellers will not allow the listing broker to give compensation to the other broker. So in 5B1, it says when earned and payable, seller will pay broker, insert the amount to be paid to the broker only, either A, a percentage of the sales price, or a flat fee. So we have 5A where the seller says, yeah, I do want you to cooperate, listing broker with the other brokers. And 5B says, no, I don't want you to. Okay, so those are the two provisions that we have changed in the actual broker compensation. Any questions on those two paragraphs?
Marilyn, I do have a question. Good to see you again, by the way. I've always thought that the lawsuit was for transparency, correct? What would you say about, you know, this is creating an environment where it's not transparent because it's outside of MLS. So what's the logic there? Can you let us know?
The basis of the lawsuit was that the sellers sued because they had never been given an opportunity to say, I don't want you to offer compensation to the other broker.
Okay, so it's transparency among the seller and the listing agent,
The listing.
It's not transparency to the buyer's agent.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marilyn, I have a question. Marilyn?
Uh-huh.
Okay, what will happen to the old contract? Should we honor what we agreed with the seller, or we have to renegotiate everything with the sellers?
If you're not under contract by August 17th, you'll have to do an amendment. Actually, you're probably going to do it July 9th because HAR is going to change and allow the new field where a seller can provide a concession to a buyer. So the compensation that's here is really found in both old paragraph 8 and then paragraph 5. The only difference is this one is very clear that the seller can negotiate and doesn't have to offer anything compensation to the other broker via the listing broker.
Marilyn, I have a question regarding 5A, 1 and 2. So in the event that I negotiate with my listing, a percentage that we're going to pay to me, the broker, and then in 5.2, we're going to pay so much of that to another broker bringing a buyer. In the event that a buyer wants to not be represented, and they come to us and they submit an offer and we accept that offer, does the seller pay from A1A, or do they take A1A and?
No, they don't subtract anything. They're going to pay us based upon 5A1, as they always have. Paragraph 5 has always been the listing broker.
You're not saving money when you're unrepresented. You're not saving the seller money when you're unrepresented.
No.
That's what I wanted to clear up. Okay, thank you.
And quite frankly, I've had several agents that have a menu of options that they like to negotiate with the sellers, and that class action lawsuit didn't result in that diminishing, but increasing. You know, it's just basically what the listing agent is willing to provide. It's interesting because what we see here is the same that really was in the contract that we had, the agreement that we had yesterday. The problem is it didn't have a breakout field of where the broker's fee without compensation for the other broker. That part was not real clear, but it is real clear in our new forms that we will use now. So the seller negotiates with the listing broker based upon your conversations, your value proposition, and then what you and the seller decide on that. Any other questions on 5A or 5B? Okay. Now, there is a note that is here, and this note lends itself to understanding. We just got through talking about compensation, and we're not talking about compensation with this note. We're talking about buyer expenses, and they're going to define it as any are required so that the seller understands what are buyer expenses, right? And in it, it says, no, seller paying buyer's expenses. In addition to paying the above broker's fees, a buyer may request seller to contribute an amount towards buyer's expenses, such as buyer's broker fees or other closing costs. See paragraph 11F for broker's authority regarding such contributions. Now, we'll see this again when we go to paragraph 11, but what does this basically mean? It means that on July 9th in Matrix, there will be a new field that will have an area where if your seller is so inclined to want to share what they're willing to offer to a buyer, they're able to do that. Are they bound by what's in MLS? Absolutely not. They're not bound by it at all, but there is an ability to place that notation, what a seller may consider contributing towards buyer expenses. They defined it because they wanted you to understand, sellers, that a buyer may have expenses. A buyer signed a buyer tenant agreement saying that they owe the buyer brokerage compensation. Okay, so that's a way to do that. What you are going to find is that once that field becomes available in MLS and your seller is inclined to offer a concession, you will most likely do an amendment or do the seller's authorization, which is a special modifications to a form that's not required, but it is available for you to use. But again, the note is just to the seller defining what a buyer's expenses could be, right? Why did they do that? Well, when Texas Realtors met with the Broker Laura Committee in April, the Broker Laura Committee did discuss the changes in 12A1B. In that paragraph, those are usually buyers' expenses that were identified to when they acquired the loan, right? And what they were thinking in the contract form, they're going to define that buyer's broker's fees could be a part of buyer's expenses. Okay, so the reason they did it for Texas Realtors is they know there's something coming with a modification and explanation in the contract itself regarding buyer's expenses, what it's going to be and how it's going to be defined and expanded to include broker's fees that the buyer may be required to pay. Any questions? Okay,
Yes, Marilyn, I'm sorry, I couldn't get my button.
it's okay, no problem.
When is that, those documents gonna be out? You said that it's gonna be listed that the buyer's expenses will be expanded to include broker's fees. Do we have a date on that? When the
Our
form-
Trek contract forms?
Yeah.
Okay, let me explain what's going to happen. The Trek Broker Lawyer Committee meets again in July 12th. That's why I've told y'all to please tell them how you want to see the ratification of compensation in our contract forms. On July 12th, when they meet, that subcommittee they had to appoint because we kind of brought it to their attention that we felt that they're not having some sort of built into the contract form, much like it is in Farm and Ranch, or having a separate addendum, which I'm opposed to. I hate the fact that we have to have one more addendum to do that. I'd rather have it embedded. So what happens is if the Trek Broker Law Committee makes some decisions about what they will approve as proposed changes, they send that to Trek. Trek meets in August. At the Trek meeting in August, if Trek says, we will post these for 60 days for comments, and then we will meet later. In October, the Broker Law Committee meets, reviews all the postings. They're seeing if they're going to include some further changes, or are they willing to go with what they proposed to Trek in August? And if they approve everything, all the contract form changes in October, Trek meets in early November. If Trek approves it in early November, then they will be mandatory for use and are usually available in December, but mandatory usually about 30 days after they post it. So poor Carla, does that answer your question?
Yes. I won't be looking for that form change anytime in the immediate future.
See, and that's what was so irritating. And that's really Lori Levy, our general counsel, Texas Realtor, she and David Jones were at that meeting. And it was quite apparent that some of the attorneys on the Broker Law Committee felt like, well, it wasn't their place to try and get compensation for the buyer's broker. And they were told by Trek Commissioner, who is well-placed at Texas Realtors and NAR, and Lee York said, well, you all want to get paid. Why are you so opposed to that? Plus, it's already in our Farm and Ranch contract. The ratification, it says, who's going to pay it and how much? Real transparent. People sign it. So while our contract forms haven't changed, we'll go through the addendum that Texas Realtors had to create because of the quagmire where Trek's forms had not changed. Nothing's in contract forms for us. Any other questions? Okay, so now you, as you see, that's paragraph 5 changes, right, for our compensation. It has the same thing about earned, same thing about payable, other compensation, protection period, and the county in which we're going to receive our compensation, that type of thing. Now, what you're going to see next was what they referenced in paragraph 5 about the other things. But before we get there, in Broker's Authority, 11D4 changed, okay? And they added something, and it says, in accordance with applicable MLS rules as outlined in paragraph 6, broker may disseminate information about the property to other brokers and to prospective buyers, including offers of compensation to buyers' representatives and applicable disclosures or notices that seller is required to make under law or contract. So if the seller agreed in 5A for the listing broker to cooperate with the other broker, this paragraph gives us permission to disclose that. Now, the other change is a new provision, a new paragraph, and it said, seller does or does not authorize broker to share with other brokers and prospective buyers that seller will consider contributing an amount towards buyer's expenses, such as buyer broker fees or other closing costs. Seller is not obligated to pay any specific amount and has sole discretion to negotiate payment of buyer's expenses with the buyer under the sales contract, right? That's why I said Chuck's going to be changing that at some point. Now, I'm going to just play devil's advocate here. Why would a seller not want to disclose that? Well, they may say, well, you know, I'll consider it based upon the offer, but I don't want to say that I'm going to do something like that, even though I'm not obligated to it and I get to negotiate it. I'm not obligated just because I said I was going to do it. But some sellers are going to look at it like, I want to hold it closer to the vest, right? That's part of my negotiating abilities. Some other sellers are going to say, hey, no, I want you to tell them so that it makes my property look more desirable than my neighbors down the street. Does everybody kind of see? They're just two different perspectives, and it really depends upon what the sellers want. But we're not going to open our mouth and disclose anything unless we have written permission from the sellers. And I'll show you a template of what, yes.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
If we could go back up where just before we got to F, am I right here under 4, where it's disseminate information about the property to other brokers and to prospective buyers? So essentially, the buyers could start calling the listing agent to say, I want to know what you guys are paying. Am I reading that correctly? Am I understanding it correctly?
No, it gives them broker's authority is to disclose that.
To the buyers, right?
Prospective buyers and their representatives.
Or is what I'm getting, correct? Yeah. That's fun. You know, we're going to take the calls from the agent asking about what we're paying, and then we also get the buyers calling, saying, yeah, that's going to be really fun.
Well, part of the situation with the NAR settlement is all those fields are not going to be able to be filtered, right? You can't find that do that because all MLS will have it stripped totally, the compensation. You won't be able to filter on seller's concessions, which is paragraph 11F. Two different things. This is compensation, and paragraph 11 is the concessions to a buyer's expenses.
Right.
Marilyn, this is Paige Martin, and I have a question for clarification.
Uh-huh.
So if we are in paragraph 5B and the seller has agreed to compensation for the buyer's agent, even though we are allowed in paragraph 11D4 to disclose it, we need them to also authorize it in paragraph 11F to disclose?
No, they're two different
Two
things.
different things. So
Yeah.
the contribution is 11F, the commission is the other,
Yeah.
and they're two separate things.
They're two separate things. F is only for buyer's expenses.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And truthfully, that's the biggest issue where listing agents were wanting to know specifically, what does it mean? It has nothing to do with compensation, even though it says in there what, it defines that what a buyer's expenses could be, right? So they're gonna
Yeah.
explain what it could mean, but it is not about compensation there, it's about a concession, right? Because again, compensation is gonna be totally stripped from MLS. Any other questions? Very good questions.
Well, we want to be wonderfully perfect and we want to get it right because we definitely don't want it coming back through compliance. So we want to learn it correctly.
Well, I think the biggest issue you're going to have is how you explain the changes, right? And I'm going to be real simple to them. In our current listing agreements, they've already agreed to everything, but now if we don't have them under contract, we'll have to do an amendment to that listing agreement because it's not about compensation. It's about getting their permission to disclose what is in paragraph 11D4 and permission to disclose what's in 11F. So we've already had the discussion about compensation, and that's already on our listing agreement. Our amendments will be about getting written acknowledgement of permission to share certain information. So it's real simple on that part because we've already done the hard part. We've already negotiated with them. Okay, so those are the changes, right? The only other thing you're going to see on the draft form was, remember, that's where the broker compensation disclosure was, and nobody ever read it because it was an additional information. So basically, it's really those provisions in paragraph 11D and F and paragraph 4, buyer broker's compensation. Any questions? Okay.
Miss Marilyn, I guess my question might be for my colleagues on the call, which would be, what is the best way for us to move forward and disclose when we have permission, the offer of compensation to other brokers and to and the seller's concessions?
It won't be an MLS or anything that downloads the information from MLS. Most of the brokerages are going to put their own listing service where it can be displayed. And also we have seen when flyers and other advertisements that are not a part of MLS, you're able to disclose that information.
Yeah.
Marilyn? Marilyn?
Yes?
It's Philip. I have a quick question. Before the concessions to buyers were also limited by the lender. Is that going to happen now?
It still is subject to that, right?
I'm sorry. So, but you just said that a buyer's expense is the commission to the fee that the buyer's agent is going to charge them.
Yes, correct. And if the buyer is financing, it would be subject to the lender's approval. Number one, because they're not going to finance it. They're going to have to pay it. And the lender would be the one who would determine, are they able to pay the buyer's brokerage compensation and still be approved individually for the loan.
Okay.
And, VA put out voluntary mandatory discretion right now. They put a moratorium. VA would never allow a VA borrower to pay a buyer's brokerage compensation. And as I'd said in previous ones, I really felt that was discriminating against the VA borrower to not
Mhm.
have representation. And they put a moratorium. Now, the lenders I've spoken to said that it is based upon the situation for the VA borrower. Again, the same way it would be for an FHA purchaser as well as conventional. The lender would have to see, do you have the monies to pay the buyer brokerage fee and be individually approved for the loan? So it is subject to the lender's approval.
And that goes case by case, Marilyn, it must, as far as
Yeah.
the credibility, credit worthiness of the buyer.
Correct, and how much assets they have to do it.
Marilyn,
Mhm.
I've got one question. Are we allowed to disclose the commission to the other broker at our open houses at printouts? Because I usually do folders and I put everything about the house. Are we allowed to disclose that on
You
there?
can on your flyers. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay,
Just
perfect.
cannot do it on anything that's tied to MLS.
Thank you.
As long as you have permission from the sellers, that's the 11D4.
Correct.
Mhm.
Marilyn, this is Arash. So some website like Zillow or another, where they copy paste from HR and information goes to their website. So Zillow, they have paid ad to the other agents, selling the leads to other buyer agents. So what will happen to those things? Is it like, if we want to promote, really, we want to promote a listing to say that, hey, we pay commission for buyer agent, but it's not allowed on MLS. What is the best? I mean, I know that we can do it on our website, print it in the open house, but those sources will be terminated, like coming from Zillow or coming from other realtor.com or whatever. So is there anything thought about these things, these changes, or everything will be a stop on MLS?
Well, anything that is tied to downloading anything from MLS is prohibited from identifying any compensation, but you certainly can do it through your flyers, through your social media, as long as you are not downloading the feed from your MLS.
And we can do it in an email to
Absolutely.
the other agent.
Correct. Right. Okay. So now we're going to look at the amendment to listing, okay, because that form changed. And what they did is, in the amendment to listing, they added 2 paragraphs that are directly related to compensation, right? We're not going to need them because if we've already further discussed, this is in the benefit of you changing what you'd already previously agreed on in your previous listings. And it says the broker's fee is changed to paragraph 5A1 or 5B1. As you can see from that, we don't have that in our old listing agreement. That's why it's not applicable on something like that. But what you are going to see is in paragraph F, we're going to be able to add the information regarding permission that they give us to disseminate the information about compensation with other brokers if the seller has agreed to do that, as well as the seller giving us permission to provide a possibility that the sellers would consider a concession of buyer's expenses. So those would be the 2 areas that we're going to probably have in our listing agreement that about July 9th, when HAR just changes it and has that. It will all be done by August 17th if you're not under contract. Once you're under contract, you don't have to go back and change your listing agreement or your buyer tenant agreement. It's just in those areas where we're talking about the compensation is totally stripped from MLS. You would need permission in writing from your sellers to convey that information and disseminate that information. And at the bottom of the form, you're going to see the broker compensation disclosure, as you'll see it in almost all of the forms that changed on something like that.
Marilyn, what's best practices if we have listing agreements intact now, just to use this amendment?
Yeah, you'll use this amendment, paragraph F, and you're going to get their permission to disseminate information about compensation, or if it would be considered for you to be able to share that they would consider providing a seller's concessions to buyer's expenses.
Okay, so that's what you want to see. On the existing listing agreements that we have, you want to see amendments for those.
Yes, and as I said, they'll have to be done by August 17th if you're not under contract.
Yeah, I get it. So you don't want a whole new listing agreement signed.
Well, you know, I think that's kind of foolish. You either have a listing agreement.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I have prepared language that should be inserted. We're probably going to do a template for you that'll make it a little easier. Mitch and I are going to get together on that, because the biggest thing you have is, from a listing perspective, is you've already discussed the compensation. Now you have to discuss if you need their permission to disclose and disseminate it once it's stripped from MLS on August 17th. And then if you're willing to, if the seller says, yeah, tell them all, I'll give them a concession of X number of dollars, you would want that in writing. That would be your authorization to do that. Any questions?
You know, the only thing is going to change. This is what's really going to change. Okay, when we send our clients a list of properties that they may be interested in, before we send it, we should be making that call before we send it to find out if we're going to get compensation, if we're representing the buyers. But we can't really do that because we don't be supposed to be looking for that as a reason for sending our clients a property, because in the buyer's rep, they're going to be agreeing to pay us 3%.
Dilsey, we're not talking about buyers yet. I'm going to get to them. We're just here on listings. We're just concentrating on the listing side right now.
I wish I could stop my brain for just doing as you say, but you know, I had to bring it up because my brain was not just sitting right where you were while I was listening to other people. Forgive me. I'll mute myself.
We'll get to that in just a few minutes. Okay. All right. The next form that we use quite a bit.
Marilyn,
Yes.
I wanted to just point out also that for broker associates printed name, it is now, all of them are asking for the license number of the associate.
Yep.
That's a change. Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
See down here in blue where it says broker associates printed name is there and their license number. All the information that's on the information about brokerage service is basically about your license number, and the brokerage name will be there. Okay. The next form that changed that we do use a lot is the representation disclosure. And again, the brokerage name and their license number, and the broker's associate and license number. And then they completed it showing that the law, the occupations code law, requires that we have to disclose to a prospective party, who we represent, right? And we all know that if it's done orally, nobody remembers. So we better make sure it is always done in writing, right? So in paragraph B, they changed broker represents the following party, either the seller or landlord, and you'll put the names of the individuals, or a buyer tenant. Then in C, what I like about it is it really says to them, it says a real estate license holder, while acting as an agent, is a fiduciary. The primary duty of the license holder is to represent the interest of their client. The license holder must treat other parties to a transaction honestly and fairly. However, the duty to their client is primary. And it bold and underscored. The undersigned persons acknowledge there is no agency relationship with broker as of the date of this disclosure. And you know why they had to do that is because prospects mistake your being a professional and your demeanor is friendly and those type of things. They mistake that for what? You working for them, no matter what you told them. That's why it's so critical. Listing agents use this quite a bit when there's a prospect that wants to come to the property when place an offer. They have to understand that they don't have a fiduciary duty. We have no agency relationship with them. We'll treat them honestly and fairly. But bottom line is, so it really was very good, the changes that were made for the representation disclosure. Okay. Any
And
questions?
Marilyn, when would we use this?
When a
if
listing
somebody-
agent has a prospect that comes to their property and wants to put an offer in on it.
Yeah,
call it-
or wants to be a rogue dude and think that they want to represent themselves?
Right, correct, a customer. Mhm.
Okay.
Would we use it at an open house?
No. And an open house, you are representing the seller.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Intermediary, well, I added this, there've been no changes to it. I just want everybody to understand that this form allows the broker to make the appointments and for the respective parties to acknowledge it before the agent turns and represents their buyer, their prospect at a fiduciary level. So it's very important that we understand the timing on this, that this form has to be totally completed. And whose job is it? It's a listing agent's job. That's your job. If you've got an agent in your office says that we're going to present an offer, you're going to say you cannot present an offer until we have all the appointments made and everybody signs and dates this form. Because until they make the appointments, the parties have not acknowledged it. And that's what they need to do. Ms. Betty Bessemer would be doing this training if she were with us today. She loved this topic, big time.
Yes.
Okay. So now what we're going to do is we talked about the listing side. As I said, it's pretty clear cut. Is there transparency? Yeah, it's pretty simple. The forms are pretty easy to explain and what our duty will be. And now we're going to get to the residential buyer tenant representation. Now they call this the long form, and then we'll talk about a short form. Real quickly, NAR defined what working with a buyer is. Working with a buyer is sending them a list of properties they'd be interested in or showing them properties. So gone are the days where we kind of put this aspect of our duties to the side. We're going to have to make sure it is handled properly. In other words, before we would show a property to a buyer, we have to have this written agreement. Why did NAR do that? Well, because NAR is going to, in their settlement agreement, they said, look, we want every buyer to know that they're going to pay the compensation, how much it is, right? It's transparent. Now, in this long form, the provisions that they changed kind of expanded a little bit more than what we had in our previous form. Paragraph 3C, in the market area says we can do anything we want in the parameter of Texas. Well, that's not true. Your broker has to appoint you to work in certain geographic areas because they have to know your proficiency. But more importantly, they mention specified as follows. For example, insert a property address, subdivision, city, county, zip code, whatever you want to. And this is, again, probably encouraging the agents to be very specific with what the buyer understands and acknowledges and goes into an agreement. We had some that just left it blank. You can't do that. The biggest issue is it has to be known by the buyer what market area you're going to be showing them properties, not just leaving it open-ended. That was the biggest issue. The change in paragraph 4 term was because you're going to think that buyers and tenants didn't know what the word commences meant. So they changed it to begins. But I'm going to tell you, I have too many agents who don't know what commences meant. So I'm glad they made the change because It begins on this and ends on that date, okay? Now, the big change is in paragraph 7, broker compensation. So it used to be in paragraph 11 of the old form, but now it's all in paragraph 7. And what you're going to see is, again, the broker compensation disclosure. As I said, you're going to see it in every one of our agreements in that. Now, paragraph 7A says, when earned and payable, client will pay the broker. Purchases a percentage of the sales price or a flat fee. For leases, a percentage of 1 month's rent or percentage of all rents to be paid over the term of the lease, or a flat dollar amount. Real simple, very much like what was in 11A, but it had a run-on sentences. I think this is much easier in to see and have a buyer really acknowledge in what they're agreeing to. Now, paragraph 7B is source of compensation. That's the same paragraph that was in 11B of our old form. And it said, look, I'm always going to try and get the compensation from another party, right? Could be seller, landlord, or their agents. And if such persons refuse or fail to pay broker the amount specified, client will pay broker the amount specified, less any amounts broker receives from such persons, right? So say for example, this buyers get all upset and say, well, I don't want to pay your compensation. Can somebody tell me what they would say to a buyer?
Then I'm
You
not
have to find-
representing you. I'm representing the seller.
No, we're talking about buyers now.
You'll have to find someone else.
It could
Or-
be, or
Who will
you
work for free.
could
Yeah.
say, would you want me for the properties that you're interested in seeing before we make an offer? Would you want me to verify about the compensation with the listing broker? Right? That's what would happen. But you're never going to strike out if such persons refuse or fail to pay broker, because you're not going to have any compensation after August 17. It's all going to be stripped. Everything will be in a separate written agreement. So there's a way you could show the properties, and if the listing agent can be approached to get into a written compensation agreement so that the buyer feels more comfortable in presenting an offer, you can do that. But you're not going to mark that out, because you'll be working for free if you can't get the compensation from another party.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, a lot of these paragraphs are the same as what we've always had. I think Texas Realtors have done a great job. I just like paragraph 7A is just broken out clear, right? Showing the compensation we could receive if we represent them in a purchase of a property or a lease. Now, paragraph C, earned and payable is the same, acquisition of brokers listing, intermediary transactions. But 7E is changed. The previous one did not have an area for E, 3, and 4 to list bonus amounts or other compensation. Okay, so here's what a lot of agents are upset about. They said, well, when I work with this buyer, I don't know if there's a bonus. Well, you know what? You can amend the agreement. We have an amendment that you can use to amend it, but you're not going to get anything unless the buyer says, I acknowledge it in writing. Okay, yeah, I'll give you an example. Say you've shown resale to these buyers as well as new construction, and they decided to go to new construction, and that builder for that month has a promotion, right? Now, always in the builder's contract forms, it said what compensation was, right? And in our previous one, it always said that the broker will retain the bonus, but didn't put a dollar amount. NAR is saying that you don't get it unless the buyer agrees for the amount that you have in your list, your buyer tenant agreement. So in other words, will some buyer agents put in a figure that they think will be a compensation of a bonus. You know, they're just going to put a certain dollar value in it. They might, otherwise they would have to amend it prior to them ever getting it. And the biggest issue was the MCAs that were on my other calls. They said, well, how would we know if the agent says I get a bonus? Well, I said, you'd have to go back to what they agreed to in writing. Makes the MCA department a nightmare, a headache. But bottom line is, that's what we're faced with this settlement.
Ms.
Now-
Marilyn, excuse me, are the writings, do they have to be signed or can it be just an email exchange?
Pardon me, I didn't understand that.
The writings that we get from other listing agents agreeing to our compensation, does it have to be signed or could it just be in an email
Oh,
exchange?
you will never, ever take an email or text word. You're going to have the compensation agreement between brokers completed before the offer is ever presented or executed.
Okay,
Yeah, we don't take anybody's word. Not when compensation is involved.
yeah, so email is considered like taking their word.
Yeah, we can't do that, or text.
Yeah,
And frankly, I had an agent last week who called me and said, this is a prime example. My buyer wants to put an offer in, but we needed to find out something about the property. And by the time the listing agent finally returned the call, they said, oh, we're in multiple offer situation and the seller will make their decision by noon today. He said, that's what he's afraid of. And I said, I agree. I understand that. Now, our listing agents are going to be great about getting back timely because it's in the best interest of their sellers, right? But some agents might not be doing that. So that'll be a big issue. But again, 7E expanded. You have to put a value in for a bonus that you could receive or any other compensation. It has to be a rate or a dollar amount. It cannot be open-ended on something like that. Any questions about that?
So it can't be the BSTA, just offer, you can't say offered BSTA anymore.
No. Has to be a dollar amount. That's what the NAR settlement said. They want it to be transparent. They want the buyer to know exactly what they have agreed upon. Okay, protection period is the same, and the other paragraphs just had lettering on that. So bottom line is, that is what the changes are for our buyer tenant agreement, but what we call what? The long form, right? They're going to show that this is going to always be considered the long form. Now, let's look at the short form, okay?
I still have a question, Marilyn, on the bonuses. So what if you have a buyer that says, yeah, let's say that you've got somebody that has agreed to pay so much in the commission, and then you want the deal with the bonuses. Can the buyer say, yes, we'll accept you to accept the bonus, but we want 50% of it?
Yeah, they can try and negotiate with you.
And how do we complete that? And that's another subject, I guess.
Well, this is saying in an amount not to exceed. So let me just put a dollar figure here. Say you put $10,000 there.
Okay.
And the buyer signed it and agreed to it. And then when the reality hit for this provision, it's going to be $2,500. And the buyer says, I want half of that. Well, you'd have to do an amendment to your buyer tenant agreement to show
Perfect.
that.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to look at the short form. This is a whole new form. Okay. And in it, it adds some provisions that allow you to be just a showing agent, not a fiduciary, right? Just a showing agent and get compensation. The parties, the same thing, broker is appointed. You know, they appoint the client to be represented by the agent. The definitions the same way in paragraph 3C. market area, it says, for example, insert property address, subdivision, city, county, or zip code. Then it has the terms, begins and ends. And now paragraph 5 of the short form says, okay, broker, we have to comply with the minimum requirement duties by law, okay? Where would we be able to find reference to the minimum duties by law? It's in the IABS that they just initialed and dated, right? So you can easily tie it back to that so they can see that. Broker may represent other prospective buyers or tenants who may seek to acquire the same properties as client. That's a competing client's provision in the law form, right? And it says check only one box. You're either going to be a full service. The broker will use the broker's best efforts to assist a client in the acquisition of property in the market area that we had defined above in paragraph 3, or showing services. And paragraph 6, 7, and 8, the client obligations, broker compensation, and intermediary do not apply if you're showing services only. And it says client will pay broker a fee of X number of dollars due upon execution of this agreement. Now, most of the discussions I've had involve, well, what do I charge, right? And I think that's going to be the brokerage determining what the minimum you can charge, because the cost involved for the market center to process the payment to KW is going to be a cost. And so they might set a threshold that you can't charge less than this for the fee for showing services. Okay, it just really depends on market center. Mitch, what do you think about an agent that puts a dollar value of 0 in as the broker's fee for showing services? Are they working for free?
Yes.
Could they have some liability issues?
Yes.
Yeah. If something happened while they were out showing,
yeah, there's no indemnification on here. Basically, you're a sub-agent, and yeah, I don't care for this form.
No, a lot of people don't. And as I said, I'm a fiduciary, so I would never use this form. And I really believe that they had to create it because of the NAR requirement through their settlement agreement that says you can't show something unless you have a signed written agreement. Right. But you're limited when you are a showing service agent. That's all you are. You don't perform any of the client obligations. Broker compensation does not come into play, nor does intermediary. Okay, you just showing, right, on something like that. And again, at the
Marilyn, can I ask something real quick? I noticed that a listing agent could open the door for a prospective buyer. Would they at that time charge the buyer to open the door or not?
No, as they're a seller's agent. They're a listing agent. They represent the sellers. When you represent the sellers, you don't have to have a buyer tenant agreement. It's your job. It's your job to show the property. That's why a lot of listing agents have commented about if there's going to be an increased number of prospects, right, that come to them and say, I want to see your property. The listing agents are really rethinking the cost involved with doing that. I know they're going to be contacted more frequent than they are once you have to have a buyer tenant agreement, a short form, just to have showing services. Now, is this form, if you use this form for full services, will it meet most of the issues? Yeah, but like Mitch just mentioned, there's no indemnification or any other issues that come to play when you are a fiduciary. And so it might work for some aspects of it, but most of the brokers do not like this form if you're going to really work for the buyers, right? They want this form only used if you're going to be showing services only.
I have a question.
Mhm.
If it seems like this is something I could use to show how properties, and if then the buyer decides to put an offer on one, I would switch to the long form so that I had the details.
You would do an amendment, and we'll get to that amendment where it accommodates the conversion from showing services to full services.
Okay.
But again, this really would only be to satisfy the NAR settlement, saying that you have a signed buyer tenant agreement, specifying whatever fees will be payable by a buyer prospect. That's the big thing. They don't want buyers to think in that settlement, as I was talking to Dan about that, it was really about sellers were very upset because they didn't think they ever had the chance to negotiate, to never compensate the buyer's brokerage, right? And so what the settlement does is says all buyers need to pay their own buyer brokerage compensation. But Texas Realtors has provisions that say, hey, we're going to first seek to get it from other sources, right, with the buyer's permission. And then once the buyer finds out if there is compensation or not available, then the buyer will make a determination about if they want to go forward with the offer or make up the difference or have to pay it all on their own. Okay, any questions about the short form? Okay, so now we're going to look at the amendment. Okay. So just like Casey said, here we are, we've got a showing services only short form. And then they say, you know, I really like you. I feel you're the ultimate professional. I would like for you to assist us with acquiring this property. Right? Okay. Well, they have new paragraphs, as you can see, they're identified in blue. And it says, C, for TXR 1507 only. That's the short form that we just went through. It says broker's obligation in paragraph 5 is changed to full services, or it could be changed from full services to showing services only, right? Depends, but it gives you the ability to do that. And then C2 says client does or does not authorize broker to act as an intermediary under paragraph 8. Okay. To change broker's fees, also complete paragraph D below. Because again, you may have to modify it based upon what you're able to get as a compensation agreement between broker and owner, okay, or broker. So for TXR 1501 and 1507, 1501 is the long form, 1507 is the short form. It says broker fees in paragraph 7A are changed too. So in the event there needed to be a change on those forms, that's the paragraph you would use. And then E, this is only for the long version that you have as of today, because 7E4 doesn't apply to our old buyer tenant agreement from yesterday. So for other compensation in paragraph 74 is changed to, and that was the one that was after bonuses. And it says that you can either put a rate or a dollar amount, but it cannot be open-ended at all if there's other compensation that you have available to you.
Marilyn, I have a quick question. This is Priscilla. I was wondering if these forms are already in our .loop library for us to look over.
The final versions are in .loop, in the TXR interactive library.
Thank you very much.
But not in DocuSign. So they're all there for you to go to TXR's library and see all of them.
Thank you. I'll review.
Marilyn, this is Paige Martin again. Just a clarification question on this form. If we have existing buyer reps, is this what we would use to amend them to match the NAR language about commissions not being set by law?
Well, we already had that in our current tenant agreement. What we would use this amendment for is if we wanted to identify the bonus or any other compensation, they have one for paragraph E for other compensation. But if we wanted to amend the bonus, that we would not have identified specifically in our previous buyer tenant agreement prior to today.
Got it. And so if there are no changes to our existing buyer reps, we don't need to use this form moving forward?
Well, this amendment is there for you to use any change that you might have on your
Okay.
buyer tenant
Got it.
agreement.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on your amendment to the buyer tenant agreement? Okay. So now we're going to look at the general information and notice to buyers. Again, I told you, you're going to see the compensation, the brokerage disclosure again in every form that we touch, okay, on something like that. So that's the change in the general notice. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. Now we're going to talk about, well, Marilyn, if after August 17th, we don't have any compensation, what do we do? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you the current forms we have for registration agreement have now been changed to compensation agreement. Now, this is one between broker and owner. Well, when did I use this, Marilyn? Well, you would use this for sale by owners, for lease by owners, and builders that are not represented by another brokerage. Okay, it's the same form. They changed a little bit of the wording, capitalization on certain things, but it's the same thing. We would have this register the prospect with the owner and say, I'm going to get compensation either for the sale, the lease of it, renewal of the leases, and that type of thing, who I represent, and then all parties will acknowledge it and sign and date. Now, as Mitch had pointed out, the biggest thing is your license number and your brokerage license number are going to go on everything. And they made that change on this compensation agreement. Now, we did this all the time with for sale by owners. There was an extra step. We wouldn't submit an offer unless we thought we were going to get what? Paid, because our buyers had signed a buyer tenant agreement that said, you're going to pay me if I don't get it from some other source. It's always been that way. We just now have to incorporate it as of August 17th. And for any of those listings currently where they don't have any compensation for the other broker. Okay. Now, the compensation agreement between brokers, the 2402, is basically registering our client. Our client is the buyers, right? They've already signed a buyer tenant agreement. They're a client. They're not a prospect. And we're going to request a certain percentage or a flat dollar amount. We're negotiating with the listing broker. The lease, a percentage of 1 month's rent, or certain flat fee under the leases. So why is this important? We don't take their text. If you text them and says, do you offer buyer brokerage compensation? They can tell you, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Well, then we're going to do this in writing. We don't take their word with a text or even an email. You have to get this signed. Now, could you present this at the same time you presented the offer? You could, but the biggest problem for you would be what? If you didn't have it signed, you don't have any compensation. Okay, now I'm going to show you the new addendum that TXR created because Trek is behind on getting our contract forms to have a ratification of fee among the parties, right? So they created this addendum. This addendum will be on every offer the moment MLS no longer has compensation, right? So that would be after August 17th, or in the event your buyer wants to present an offer now on an MLS listing that gives you no compensation, right? Because it can be possible that that is even happening right now. You notice that it says you can't use this on the farm and ranch contract because Trek embedded in the farm and ranch contract the ratification of the fee. Parties get to sign it. Everybody knows it. This one will have the ability to be enforceable, but you have to make sure that you have the 2402 already signed, or maybe the 2401 that you have signed. The listing broker's fees, the seller shall pay listing broker based on a separate representation agreement. Yeah, that's called our listing agreement, right? D, other broker's fees will be paid as specified below. And buyers shall pay.
Marilyn, question. Okay, I'm a little confused, but I don't think so. Okay, so this is an addendum. Like if we sell something, and a question, if we sell something between now and August, then we're covered under what the MLS says?
Correct.
Okay.
But
so
the MLS right now could have listings that don't offer you any compensation.
Right, because when is that going to change? I mean, could it be that right now we're getting listings put up that don't mention compensation?
Yeah,
okay.
So it's always been negotiable to do that.
Oh, okay. So this we would use pretty much every time to make sure that the email is just put in writing and understood between the brokers what compensation is going to be paid.
This is an addendum to the contract. The compensation agreement is between the broker or the broker and owner, and that is a separate document that's already signed.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this is on the addendum to make it contractually binding. And the buyer and sellers have to know about it. So in D, other brokers, it's the amount due. So D1 says listing broker shall pay X number of dollars or a percentage of the sales price as contained in a separate written compensation agreement. That's the 2402 I showed you. Okay, that's the compensation agreement between brokers. D2 says seller shall pay X number of dollars or percentage of the sales price as contained in a separate compensation agreement between seller and other broker. That's the one we use for sell by owners, for lease by owners, and for builders who aren't represented. D2B says, hey, I didn't get a 2401 done with you, but I want X number of dollars or percentage of sales price towards other brokers' fees. No, use this option only if there is no separate written compensation agreement between seller and other broker. So if you didn't get a 2401 done, you can use D2B, and it will be binding. It says amounts in 1 and 2A are for informational purposes only and do not change compensation listed in the separate agreements that they had, the 2401 or the 2402. Any amount listed in 2B, D2B creates a new obligation for seller. So this will be binding on the seller if you did not have a compensation agreement between broker and owner. The authorization says that the escrow agent to pay the listing and other broker in accordance with this addendum. Okay, so it's very clear what the escrow agent, the title company, will do based upon what this addendum has said, right? And then it again says broker's fees are not set by law and fully negotiable, right? The only element you will have a problem with after August 17th, when it strips the compensation, is that you would attach this addendum to the offer, but you better make sure you have one of these agreements back in writing, right?
Marilyn, this is Catherine. If you're a listing agent, could you set up a Twilio account and have your voicemail saying, if you're calling about a listing, please text the MLS number to Twilio number, blah, 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 and have that 2402 as an autoresponder so that you're not constantly sending these things by email and all that?
You can't have any reference about MLS at all.
Not even on your own voicemail? Your own phone number voicemail?
Not to do with compensation, no.
And if you do the address?
Well, I guess you could do the address. There would be no problem on something like that.
Okay, that will make it easier.
Yeah, but when MLS is stripped of compensation, we don't use MLS and the word compensation together. Kind of how we don't talk about numbers, right, anymore. God forbid, we would all get punished. Now, the compensation agreement changed a little bit. They asked for full address and full information about the property. And you notice that it doesn't say prospect here, right? No, because you have a client, because you're under a buyer-tenant agreement. And so it also has the fee in 5A about the sales price, a percentage or a flat fee, same for a lease, about 1 month's rent or a flat dollar amount. Very similar provisions that it had before. And the only change that you're going to see a lot of is they have license number for the brokerage as well as the associate's license number. And so I'll just say there are some brokers who will not let their agents accept a compensation agreement by the listing broker. They want the listing agent rather, they want the brokers to sign it. Can somebody tell me why they would always want the brokers to sign it?
Those listings are belong to broker.
There you go. The brokers earn the compensation, folks. And now KW is different. KW says, if you said you're going to do it, we're going to hold your feet to the fire, right? But that has not been our history with other brokers who like to come after us when their agents have agreed to modification of the terms that might have been in MLS. Okay, so just be conscious about this. Texas Realtors is still going to have arbitration because they're going to still be issues, even though we have something in writing. You know, that's how life is on something like that. But I would just be a little leery probably of certain brokerages and making sure that their broker has agreed to the compensation. It's going to be difficult for us. One broker said, well, I'm not going to be signing any of these. Well, okay, then KW, the listing agent that signs it, it's going to happen, right? You're not going to withdraw that offer of compensation that you put it on the agreement. And they think what we do is easy. They think that what we have been presented with to comply with the NAR settlement, so we all don't, you know, have any issues, is easy. It's not easy to traverse. What I could say to you as a listing agent, you're just going to have more permission to repeat certain things, right? You got to have that in writing. You just don't get to think that, you know, you get to say whatever you want. They're very specific when it comes to compensation and seller's concessions. You got to have written permission to be able to disclose that to others, right? As a buyer's agent, look at it how you had to do it when you had a for sale by owner that your buyer was interested in, or that your buyer was interested in a property that the builder was not represented by a brokerage. We had a little extra step, right? The other process that's going to be different is that we're not going to have implied agency. They've made that clear. There is no such thing as implied agency anymore. Everything has to be in writing. You have to have a written agreement to show properties and send a list of properties, and you have to have a written agreement to be a fiduciary in the course of a transaction for a buyer. Any questions? Well, I am going to tell you, at the very end, we have the Trek Broker Lawyer Committee is meeting on July 12th. If you send an email to general.counsel@trek.texas.gov, Vanessa Burgess is the general counsel, and she'll get all your comments to the Broker Lawyer Committee. Personally, I would like to see them make all the changes for a ratification of our fee as they have done in the farm and ranch contract. Change all of the contract forms to be that way. We won't need a special addendum. Does anybody else have any opinion about what they'd like to see?
I agree with you on that, Marilyn. Makes it easy and straightforward.
I know, and Texas Realtor has had to create this addendum because Trek is behind the 8 ball for us, right? They don't have this. And as I so detail oriented how the process will work from the Broker Lawyer Committee to Trek, back to the Broker Lawyer Committee, finally to Trek to approve it, we're going to be facing a combination of the majority of the agreements and forms that we touch not only through Texas Realtors, but also through Trek are going to change one way or the other. They had almost an hour's discussion in April at the Broker Lawyer Committee about buyer expenses. And those buyers' expenses caused a little heartburn because they were trying to say, well, will this supersede what the lender will approve? You know what I'm saying? They had this vast discussion. So the subcommittee they appointed was going to review what their requirements they would think for provisions to add to the contract forms now, or were they going to consider doing an addendum? As I said, I want to keep it simple. I don't like all these extra addendum that we have to add to the contract. It's hard enough for everybody to know exactly. And personally, our clients, while they sign things, do they remember what they signed? No.
No.
They don't. And that's nothing on them. They're not used to the process, but it's just going to make it, I think, putting ourselves in the middle of having to explain things over and over and over again when everybody had already agreed to whatever it was on our listing agreement or our buyer tenant agreement.
Marilyn,
So go ahead, Arash.
I have a quick question. With these changes happening, what will happen to the referrals we get from other agents, different estates, since we don't know how much will be our commission? So how we have to sign agreement between brokers? The referral agreement.
I don't think we're going to accept a referral unless it has that disclaimer on there, on something like that. And
there is no new referral form yet?
I'm not in charge of the referral form. I know KW does it, but there's probably going to need to be some clarification on those kinds of things.
Because now I have a client from California. Actually, one agent is referring me, but I don't. Just now I had a conversation. I don't know what should I do with them.
Well, you agree to a percentage. If they don't buy anything, you don't pay anything as a referral.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just bring the situation as well for when we work with relocation companies. I'm just dealing now with a situation like the relocation charges us 42%. And now let's say if the seller is not paying this commission, the buyers need to be very clear to the buyers, look, I do charge 3%, right?
Let's
and I
talk about numbers again.
No, don't talk. Okay, but how should what's the best approach in a situation like this with buyers? They are relocating, they supposed to, well, they expect to not to have any expense. They expect the relocation to be covering for them. And the relocation just say, we are not dealing with this situation yet.
Well, I think relocation companies are going to have to change. I know a lot of them like to instruct the buyers not to sign an agreement. Well, they're not going to get to ever see the property nor have any representation. And they will, and those relocation companies are not going to get all that big relocation referral fee, right? So they're going to change their forms. But in our buyer tenant agreement that we had yesterday and the new ones, it is exactly about if the compensation I can get from the other sources is different than what I have on our agreement, the buyers will pay the difference.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the way it's always been. And it's right there in paragraph 5 still.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, my question is to you, are you suggesting that we email that email address you mentioned a minute ago to give our comments about how we would like this stuff embedded in our forms and not using all these millions of addendums?
Correct.
So can you put that email address up for us again?
Okay. It was on the last page of the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
I'm going to show you something. Okay. When all this came about, it was, for me, it was more of an issue of, since we're going to have these amendments to our previous listing agreements as well as buyer tenants agreement, we really want to keep it simple. So for the listing agreement, basically, you're just going to say, look, our MLS changed the rules, and because they did, I need to get your permission on these 2 things. Now, truthfully, I tried to fit these in on the draft form and it didn't work. I don't know how we're going to come up with that. I hate to have an attachment on the amendment to the listing, but bottom line is we need their permission to disseminate the information, which was 11D4. And then we would need their permission to add the provision about the seller does or does not allow us to authorize to share with other brokers and that type of thing. Okay. For the buyer tenant agreement, the biggest issue is identifying specific compensation in reference to bonuses or other compensation. We've already covered the compensation in the old form in 11A, and 11A no longer exists. It's in the new form. It's all in paragraph 7. But what we would just need to do is make sure that we have permission to receive bonuses if it's going to be applicable to our transaction. We don't know that, but you could put a dollar amount in and try and get your buyers to agree to it, as well as any other specific compensation that you would need. So as we get a little closer to this, we'll try and figure out how the best way we can kind of squeeze all of that on there rather than having to have a separate attachment on something like that. So it's real simple, folks. It's not complicated what we have to do to amend it. Mainly because TXR had really good forms to begin with on something like that. So we were really lucky. There was always the disclosure about compensation in the forms. It was real clear what our compensation rate was or the amounts on something like that. Any other questions?
Just a thought. Okay, say I'm a listing agent, I have a property and it's far from my home, so I'm like obligated to open the door. And I have other stuff that I'm doing too. So like to make that scheduling and getting that done, would I just recommend that they go to the open house at that point? Or would I suggest a different agent maybe show them in our,
you know, you had a showing services where you paid another agent to just show your listing. That agent that's going to show is really representing the seller, right? They're not gonna be representing the buyer. They're not working with the buyer. They're just doing something for you to show the property at your discretion.
Thank you.
Yeah, it may be hard for them to understand they can't talk about anything because they don't, although they only represent the seller, basically, in your best interest and something like that. All right, so is everybody ready?
No.
No.
Well, don't worry, we're gonna have session next month, and what I'm gonna do is give you a little list again so that you can kind of understand as a listing agent, these will be my task if I'm not under contract by August 17th, and as a buyer agent, the same type of thing, so that we kind of just get more in line with what we are going to be needing to do in the event we're not under contract. And we don't have any compensation in MLS. So there are just some processes that we'll have to take care of on something like that.
Marilyn.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Go ahead, Dulcie. Go ahead, Dulcie.
I was going to just say, essentially, us agents who've been doing this for a while, we've seen changes come down the pipe before, with all kind of things we've had to deal with, from attachments before that wasn't in a contract to, about how the changes with the 3-day rule for loans. But this one is just so drastic, and I feel we all just feel like our heads are hurting. And I think what it is, I think we're making it harder than what it is. We hear it, we see it, and it's just such a drastic change that we're just trying to wrap our brains around it. But we're all professionals, we're all smart people, we're all go-getters, and we'll figure this out and we'll get it done.
The agents that have been on my calls, a lot of them will contact me later, and they're not new agents, they're agents who've been in the business a long time. They said, I really think I'm making this more of an issue than I need to. And what I talked about when your value proposition, what we've never done a very good job of is proving our value proposition, because the compensation was unilaterally offered in MLS, right? So it really presents a different mindset that we need to have as buyer agents in particular, and feel more comfortable in giving our value proposition. What I thought was great was when Lee York turned to the broker lawyer committee, all those brokers that were on there, the lawyers all said they didn't think that it was their obligation to have compensation to make sure the buyer broker got paid. And she fired back, she said, well, y'all are all professionals and y'all expect to get paid. So I'm in her camp. I was a little horrified by that, and I thought, well, thank you very much. And you know what's interesting? What got them to finally turn around and decide to have a subcommittee to review what they might propose as changes was that it's a consumer protection issue, and TREC is a consumer protection agency.
Exactly. It's like, I don't even know why we're having this whole thing.
I mean, it was, that's TREC should have been ahead of Texas Realtors in making sure that compensation was clear to everyone if there are such a consumer protection agency. So it was a little appalling. From October 31st, they knew that lawsuit, that class action lawsuit verdict. They knew that on October 31st. I did. I provided addenda for you within a month to use to help eliminate this so-called, concealment. We were always concealing everything. That was about another state's forms. Texas Realtors has always done a good job, and I really commend them. They did a really good job, and they stepped up where TREC didn't for us on something like that. So give your comment to them, keep it professional. Don't make any terms that you don't want repeated, because they read everything. We all read all the comments that are submitted. But I really think that the easiest thing for them to do, and the most transparent and the most consumer protection asset, would be to put it all in the contract form itself. and have everybody acknowledge it.
Marilyn, another comment. I attended the HAR information that they had this morning, and they've got multiple classes. I'm taking one Friday from 6 at night to 9 at night, but forms you need to know. And that's the name of the course, Forms You Need to Know. And they'll have multiple classes just to get this clear in our head.
Right, and we will too. As I said, we'll be doing this for the rest of the year.
They had it here at the office, as well, right here online. Several people right here and taking that class this morning when I arrived. So it's good to take it together, so that way we learn it together.
Yep, absolutely. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, we're going to meet next time, and you might have some questions next time, or you're going to give us some helpful hints about how you're going to handle it so that you can share that information with all of us. As I said, now is the time for us to have a good open discussion, because August 17th is a deadline. Okay. All right, good people, please stay safe and well, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.